Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get to it. Alright, first question. My girlfriend is overweight and has confidence issues related to her weight and looks. She hates doing cardio and walking is all that she is willing to commit to. I've been trying to convince her to start lifting with me. She seems willing, and I think it will be better as she will see measurable progress in her lifts, which may ease her wish for instant gratification. She describes her ideal body, which seems to be the body of a female who lifts weights. I am literally in unfamiliar territory. What can we expect to see in terms of progression rate and recovery rate? Are there any programs you would recommend? Thank you. All right, brother. Yeah, the program I would recommend you maybe start her on. I have a basic lifting program for non-athletes, which is in my training playlist. I have a free programs playlist. Go check that one out. That would possibly be a good place for her to start, a good starting point. But what you're going to need to do first is get her in the gym for a month, just playing around, working on doing body weight squats, squatting to a box, core work like crunches, planks, weighted planks, things like that. Get her core built up and her mobility built up. And maybe even have her start with little light dumbbells, just doing some basic exercises like bench press rows with little 3-pound dumbbells. Just get her mobility going for 2, 3, 4 weeks and then put her into the program. That's what I'm going to recommend. Now, what can you expect in terms of progression rates? Expect her to progress about half the rate of a male, meaning women are going to, when you look at any program and the standard progression on it as far as pounds added to the bar, women are probably going to add about half the amount of weight a male will on any program. Like if you look at stuff like my novice program or any of that, it works that way. However, it'll still work off the same percentages. So if you work off percentage-based programs, expect the percentages to be pretty similar. But the thing is, when you look at a program like any of my little non-athlete programs I've run, I have a couple different ones. They're built upon just trying to add the weight as you're able to, adding a rep as you're able to, and when you get to a pre-described number of reps with good form, you just add weight. But yeah, expect her to be able to gain a half pound to a pound of muscle the first few months every single month, which will help her lose weight and lose body fat accordingly. Because as her muscles go up, she's going to require calories to build muscle, and that calories are going to have to come from somewhere. And if she's creating a calorie deficit through training and just doing walking, and walking is a great form of cardio, don't bash it. You can lose a lot of weight while walking, but it's going to be dramatically accelerated from the weightlifting. And by incorporating the weightlifting, she's not going to lose muscle as part of the weight. She's going to lose almost exclusively body fat, because normally if you just walk to lose weight, you lose a little bit of muscle with the fat that you lose. If you're gaining muscle, all of the weight that you lose is going to be fat. And so look at it this way. If you've lost 10 pounds and instead of losing 8 pounds of fat and 2 pounds of muscle, you gained 3 pounds of muscle over a period of time, you actually lose 13 pounds of fat. And that's the thing that she needs to realize, is that by weightlifting, the change on the scale is going to be a lot more fat change, not just weight change. And that's the important thing to look at. But the important thing is get her into the gym, get her started, get her interested, get her base built, and go from there. All right, next question. Can you explain the relationship between gaining muscle and fat? In theory, stimulating muscle makes getting relatively more insulin sensitive, and fitness experts talk about lean gains. Reality seems to show that muscle gains come with fat gains for the drug-free who are past the noob gains. Increasing calories appears to put the body in an anabolic state for muscle and fat. All right, there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. Yeah, noobs seem to recomposition really, really easy. They gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. As you become more advanced as a lifter, unfortunately, that's no longer the case. And what you find is that eating in a surplus of calories, any calories that it's over your surplus, it isn't burned off as heat, isn't stored as muscle glycogen, doesn't turn into muscle tissue, is going to be added to your fat stores. There's no way around that. But overeating enough to gain body fat makes training easier. It lets you train harder so you can stimulate more muscle growth, and it allows the body to recover better because you're giving your body more nutrition, more calories. It's going to recover easier. It's going to let you put weight on easier, which again is going to be just conducive all around to gaining muscle. In fact, overeating produces more anabolic hormones in the body and in the muscle tissue that ensures that you gain extra muscle mass. So yeah, it's kind of a catch-22 because in theory, the muscle will help you keep fat off easier, but in order to gain more muscle beyond a certain threshold, you almost need to be consuming enough food to gain body fat as well, because your recovery is better, your training is better. All the factors that you need to create the anabolic environment to gain muscle become greatly accelerated by overeating. And so, unfortunately, there's a catch-22 there. It is just very difficult for the non-novice to gain muscle without gaining fat. The best that you can hope for, though, is say, okay, how much do I really need to overeat to gain this muscle? And stop at that point and no more, so that you're limiting the amount of fat you gain. Because if you can, get to a point where you gain some muscle over several months and you only gain 3, 4, 5 pounds of body fat, you'll be able to diet that off really easily within a month. So you could do that over the course of several months and then diet that fat off, or just go back to a recomp phase for a little while, for a few months, and slowly burn the fat back off. It isn't necessary to actually have to gain a lot of fat to do this. You just have to be a little stricter with your overall food intake. Or you could just accept the slower route and say, I don't want to gain a bunch of fat, so I'm just not going to overeat much. I'm not going to gain more than half a pound or a pound a month at the very most, maybe even half a pound. Are you going to gain muscle even slower? Yeah, but you won't gain the fat. So it's really kind of a personal choice, and there's a catch-22 there. But yeah, being in an environment to where you're consuming enough to gain body fat at a significant rate, even if it's a modest rate, is simply a more anabolic environment for a whole host of reasons. And so it's almost unavoidable to gain muscle at a significant rate for the non-novice lifter if they're going to have to put some fat on as they go. Drugs can obviously help with that, but even then you see a lot of big bodybuilders on a lot of drugs who are still gaining fat when they bulk. So even that's not universal. All right, next question. Does programming really matter that much for powerlifting? I feel as long as I get a decent amount of volume and training 4 days a week and really focus on the compound lifts while doing necessary accessories, I'll be good enough. Am I wrong in thinking it is that simple, or does choosing the right program really have a significant effect? All right, I'm going to get slammed for this one by a lot of coaches, but you know what the biggest factor seems to be in what your total is going to be, or what your Wilks is going to be as a powerlifter? How many years of consistent training you put in without downtime or injury on a whole host of different programs. There could be 7 or 8 different types of programs, and you know what, at the end of the day, picking a good program instead of just making sure that you progress on your big compound movements and develop overall strength and size, a good program simply trims time off of that. Meaning a really good program might let you do in 2.5 years what you're taking 3 to do on a different program. That's the simple reality of it for a power lifter. But ultimately, the biggest factor is always going to be years, because over the years, you're going to gain strength. You're going to gain neural efficiency with consistency and years under the iron. And there's always a direct correlation between years spent powerlifting versus your actual total at your Wilks. It's the biggest factor, is always the time. So you're right, the programming doesn't matter as much as people think. Good programming just shaves some months off of the curve of what happens over the course of a couple years. It just shaves months off. It's not necessarily going to make an enormous mind-boggling advantage, and guys just have to accept that. It's time under the iron that matters. Now, the other factor there also is your peaking program. I would say your peaking programs absolutely do matter. Your off-season, any good, consistent program is going to produce, 80 to 100% similar results to each other, depending, again, upon different factors. But your peaking programs do matter, because once you build that base, how you choose to peak and how you go into a peaking phase for a meet is really going to be the determining factor of how much of the muscle and strength that you gained are you able to actualize into effective 1-rep maxes in a competitive environment. So I would say ultimately picking your peaking programs is dramatically more important than picking your off-season programs. But a lot of different ways to look at it, a lot of ways to base build, and that's really what your off-season is. It's just about base building ultimately. And as long as you're building that base, if you're gaining muscle and you're gaining neural efficiency on the big lifts, and you do it for enough years, you're going to be good no matter what. You're going to reach your genetic potential. All right, next question. I have a question. I followed your advice to bench with a narrow grip because I want to press without hurting my shoulders, but now I have an AC joint problems, pretty sure from benching, and my AC joint hurts from time to time. However, if I change my grip from narrow to wide, still inside the rings, I can keep my back tighter and have no shoulder pain. Should I keep benching wide? Do you have any advice for me? I'm still in your novice program and my bench sucks right now, benching 200 pounds. Cheers. All right, brother, I'm going to recommend to you that since you have an AC joint problem, that benching wide is not an option for you ever. I don't care if you occasionally get a session where you get tighter and it feels like it doesn't hurt. You need to keep the benching pretty narrow. Definitely inside the rings, but I wouldn't even touch the rings. And that's still narrow benching. I mean, if your pinkies are an inch inside the rings, you're still pretty narrow. That's probably okay. That's where I want you to stay. I don't want any part of your hand making contact with that ring if you've got an AC joint problem. You're also going to want to spend a lot of time doing pulling and rear delt work. You really need to hammer those face pulls. I would say do face pulls at least 2 or 3 sets every single training session. You need to build all of that up. Use bands if you have them available. If not, go buy some bands, but tons of band work, tons of prehab work, band face pulls, around the worlds, band pull aparts. You need to be doing those all the time, and I don't want you to ever touch the rings. Keep those pinkies at least an inch inside the rings the rest of your training career. Because again, the AC joint problem, you don't want to exacerbate it. And yeah, you're going to have to learn to just get tight while using a narrower grip. It's not that hard. You just need to practice doing it. Learn to set yourself up tighter on the bench. You should be able to get just as tight with your thumbs all the way on the smooths as you can on a wide grip bench. And that's something you need to remember with that. It's just a matter of practice and learning to get tight. It's because you haven't practiced getting tight with a narrower grip that's keeping you from doing so. It's not the narrow grip itself. Practice makes perfect, and you're still a 200-pound bencher, so you're still pretty much a rookie. So you still have plenty of time to learn these skills, and you also have plenty of time to train without re-injuring yourself. But yeah, if you continue to aggravate that AC joint by doing inappropriate things after you have a problem with it and an injury, by the time you get to a 300-pound bench press one day, you might really snap your shit up. So you need to be aware of that. Be careful. All right, next question. And this is the final question of the week. Would you introduce weightlifting, hunting, and carpentry into the national high school curriculum to combat the pussification of our youth? Fantastic question, and most of you guys know this is something I cover pretty routinely on my other channel, my firearm channel. I talk a lot about masculinism and masculinity. And so, yeah, the pussification of the Western male is a deep social concern for myself personally. A lot of things have changed in our school curriculum. Actually, believe it or not, up until the 50s and early 60s, a lot of schools, thousands of schools around the United States actually had marksmanship at school. People brought their rifles to class, put them in their lockers at school, and they brought guns to school, and it was never an issue. No one ever got shot, anyone ever knows of, because of people bringing their guns to school for these marksmanship courses. It was standard in most rural areas, at least. In some urban areas for high schools, it was really, really common. Tens of thousands of students brought their guns to school for that. So I don't think we could do that in today's world. So the hunting one, I would love that, and I think every man needs to learn how to hunt. I consider it an essential life skill that I don't think anyone really should avoid learning. I think it's just essential. Again, the stuff I've covered is in my rite of passage videos on my other channel quite a bit. But I don't know how we would teach hunting in school because, again, the weapons involved, the problems we have today with gangs, with violence and everything else in schools, I just don't know if that's viable without a major social restructuring first. So maybe have to throw the hunting out. But weightlifting, carpentry, mechanic courses, yeah, I think those should be mandatory. I think that to graduate high school, I would love to see people have to do something like that, either learn basic weightlifting, or again, a woodshop class, or a basic mechanical course. I think that sort of stuff is essential, not just for teaching young men how to be men again and to find some sort of craft or masculine behavior that they can partake in and take pride in, but it also will give them some basic skills they need, because honestly, most people who graduate high school today, they don't have any useful life skills. What are they going to do? That's why we have so many unskilled laborers. At least if they learn some basic carpentry or mechanical skills, if they're not being taught that by their fathers, because we have a lot of young men who don't have strong male role models. At least if they learn that from a male role model at school, they have some basic skills that they could use to get a job right out of high school, because truthfully, not everyone's going to college today. And a lot of people who go to college now have useless degrees that they can't get a job with. I mean, I know people who got 4-year degrees who couldn't even make more than $30,000 a year getting out of school if they found a job at all, and that's just ridiculous. They end up with this enormous student loan debt, 4 years of their life spent in education, and they can't even get a decent job sometimes. because the reality is we have an oversaturated market with that. But what we don't have is enough people with useful life skills, trade skills, vocational skills. But yeah, I'd love to see even electronics classes would be a good. So anything that could teach people an actual craft or a skill or basic things that men need to know would be tremendously useful. So I would love to see a bigger push in vocational training, but weightlifting definitely would help, and that would help in general. I think that should be mandatory for physical education classes. At least one semester of weightlifting in there in order to graduate as part of the curriculum would be tremendously useful, not just for athletes, but for everyone. Get people used to weights. But again, finding coaches and instructors who are qualified to do it's a whole other issue. Look how many personal trainers aren't even qualified to do that. That's a problem. I would love to see it, but again, we're going to have to put resources into that. But definitely vocational, basic mechanical and technical skills would be useful. So again, basic mechanics, wood shop and carpentry, even electronics, any of those should almost be mandatory to graduate high school for anyone who is not looking to get some sort of scholarship or isn't college bound, almost guaranteed college bound. I think some sort of vocational training should be mandatory to finish high school. That's just my opinion, though. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. Hey, everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again, it is time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. First question. What is your opinion of a short-term mono diet of white potatoes? All right, a lot of you guys are going to go, why in the world would anyone ask that question? Well, the reason someone would ask that question is because this is actually a trend that was started a few years back. A guy had done some reading and had found out that, yeah, he shouldn't have any real nutritional deficiencies if he occasionally adds a few little things to the potatoes, a little bit of cheese or chives and things like that to his potatoes if he lived on a diet of something like 2,000 calories of white potatoes a day, because he had read that they were the most satiating food or carbohydrate source according to studies. And so he decided to give it a try, and it was successful. The guy lost quite a bit of body fat in a fairly short period of time and felt full and was very rarely hungry. So would I recommend this? Not necessarily for everyone, but for someone who really is struggling to lose just a little bit of body fat, and they have 10 pounds or so they want to lose that they can't, it might not be a bad idea. And let me break down why. And again, you've got to remember this is only in the short term. Potatoes are one of the most satiating foods that's out there. I mean, there's studies on it. It's been confirmed. It has a decently balanced nutrition profile. It's not amazing, but it's decently balanced enough that you could survive on mostly white potatoes for a short period of time without developing any nutritional deficiencies. Again, you could also bridge the gap with a little bit of fish oil, a few little veggies on the sides, things like that. A little butter on them every now and then, or a little bit of cheese on them. So it can totally be done by eating mostly potatoes. And you're calling it a mono diet because you're getting over 90% of your calories pretty much from one food source. And the other thing to consider there is the satiety factor. And this is why, if it fits your macros, doesn't work for obese people, because we're talking about, getting a wide diversity of foods that you enjoy. Well, what we found in studies is that people who are prone to overeating, by giving themselves a moderately bland diet, meaning they eat foods that they like, they're okay, but they're not amazing, they're not like their favorite foods, but that they don't dislike either, that they're just kind of middle of the road, they'll eat them, they're okay. Without a wide diversity of foods, they tend to have a much higher diet adherence. For people who are prone to overeating, wide diversities of food, those are the people who struggle to just take one bite or a small amount of something they really, really like. It's going to make them crave it and eat more of it. So for some people like that, fairly bland diets like mono diets work. That's another reason ketogenic diets work, because they restrict you to a very small number of different foods that have fairly similar flavors in a lot of ways. And the lack of diversity tends to control overeating and cravings in many people. So white potato diet, a mono diet of white potatoes, could be a viable short-term weight loss method because it's an extremely high satiety food with a decently balanced nutrition profile, and again, you're limiting food options and flavors for diet adherence. So it's viable. It's just not something I would recommend in the long term, because you will eventually develop nutritional deficiencies eating something like this. But could potatoes themselves remain a year-round staple? of someone trying to maintain their body weight? Yes, absolutely, just because of their high satiety. All right, next question. Could you make or modify one of your current programs or suggest how a fitness enthusiast of the advanced rank could train? I cannot keep up with the progression pace of intermediate programs because my gains are so slow from diminished returns. All I see for advanced programs are bodybuilding bullshit pro splits that are just a list of endless isolation exercises with no form of progression or periodization. All right, that is one of the problems you're going to run into with their calling advanced programs or just programs for guys on 2 grams of gear growth hormone and insulin who are trying to bodybuild. The problem with advanced programs is that they require fine-tuning for the individual. And the other thing that you have to remember, once you're truly an advanced lifter, it sucks. You don't see gains. It takes forever to get gains. And the thing is, one of the things that defines that you are an advanced lifter, when you basically have to train your program you're training a year ahead of time. Meaning, when you're a novice lifter, you're programming by the individual day and individual week. You're expecting to see progress every single week on something, some type of progress weekly. That's what defines a novice lifter. An intermediate, it's more of a 3 or 4 week progression, meaning you're looking at, okay, can I be stronger or better in my performance elements a month from now than I am from today? So you're looking at like monthly progression, whereas once you're a truly advanced lifter, you are looking at yearly progression of, can I be better a year from today than I am today? And that's why it really sucks. And so it requires year-long programming. So essentially what you would have to do, what I would almost recommend for the advanced lifter, you could do a linear periodization like my intermediate program, but you're going to need to scale back the progression quite a bit. And what you add through each individual block is going to have to be smaller. It might have to be cut to like a third or a fourth of what you would be doing, meaning you may not be able to actually add individual sets. You just might be trying to add one rep week to week or something. Like if you're running a linear periodization where in the 3-week blocks you increase a set every time, you might have to just increase a rep. And then so if you're doing 8 rep sets week 1, you'd go to 9 rep sets week 2, 10 rep sets week 3, then reset down, and only a very, very small increase on the bar. You might have to actually drop reps. So something you might have to drop, increase the weight 5%, and then drop down to 6 reps. And even that might be too rapid a progression for a truly advanced lifter. So it gets really tricky trying to program for advanced lifters. You've got a lot of factors to consider, and it's really why you don't see cookie cutter programs for advanced lifters, because their progressions vary so much. They have individual weaknesses that need to be addressed. And usually, if you're an advanced lifter and you're still trying to actually make progress and not maintain what you're doing, you're probably competing in something, in which case you're going to have sport-specific needs to consider. So very, very few truly advanced lifters who are still trying to make any sort of real progress are not competing in something to where they would have access to coaching and stuff anyways. Because at the end of the day, people who are just casual gym goers who have reached the advanced status are probably not planning their training out a year ahead of time, which is kind of what you have to do at the advanced level. You've got to be looking in terms of yearly progression instead of monthly. All right, next question. The age-old argument, compound versus isolation. Hey, Jason, is there any advantages to isolation over compound? I see many for compound over isolation. Example, bench press uses similar range of motion for the upper arm as a pec fly, but there is less risk of shoulder injury due to the motor pattern being easier to learn. The ratio of pec to tricep force applied is canceled out by the additional weight to the move. I hear a lot more people getting shoulder joint flaring doing flies than presses, and the movement is much easier to do safely when fatigued. And if you don't press to lock out, which is the most tricep fatiguing part of the press, you can get a similar range of motion on an incline press as a flat fly. I'd love to hear your arguments. Thanks for the advice. Yeah, that's the thing that you have to consider when it comes to compound versus isolation. Most real experts are going to recommend that you do mostly compounds. Isolation movements should generally be reserved for hitting a weak point. And that's what's so funny. You'll see guys who, they do all these various chest presses, but then they want to do a fly. Why do they want to do a fly? Because they want to take the tricep out of the exercise so that they can work more on the chest, when, you're already getting chest activation, just as much chest activation from the presses as you're going to get from the fly. If you're getting the full range of motion, or you're picking one that has the same range of motion, you're going to do it easier. And again, if you're careful, lower chance of injury when fatigued, like you said. But then they'll pull the triceps out But then they'll go do tricep exercises later when it's like, if you were worried that your triceps were limiting your chest development, you could have just done tricep exercises to get stronger on your pressing so that your chest continues to get overloaded. So people will end up isolating multiple muscles that they were working with the same compound because they want to cut different ones out and focus on them, when it actually doesn't give you any more muscle growth to focus on them. The whole point of focusing on an individual muscle with isolation is because you're trying to bring up a muscle that is lagging from doing the compound movements, or that's your weak link. And so, for example, if you do a lot of chest presses or weighted dips or whatever, you probably should only need to isolate one of the three major muscles involved. Say, the pecs, the anterior deltoids, and the triceps. You probably only need to isolate one of those, whichever of those is lagging the most after doing the chest presses. Whichever one seems to be the weak link, that's what you want to isolate. So that's the problem. It's not that isolation versus compound it's better. It's that compound generally is more efficient use of your time. You get way more done, build way more muscle mass for every minute you spend in the gym. And it's that people try to use isolation movements as primary builders is when they run into problems. That's when they run into injuries. That's when they run into having to spend extra hours in the gym they don't need, when if used appropriately, isolation movements are there to isolate and bring up your weak links, the muscles that just are not getting enough stimulation and growth for you personally doing the compounds. And it's probably only going to be a couple of muscles through your whole body. Or they're there to address a specific performance element that is being missed with your compound movements that you might need for a specific sport or a certain type of development, such as, again, a tricep movement that works the long head more if all you're doing is presses for the triceps. So again, it's about appropriate use of them. It's not one is better than the other. It's that for most purposes, compounds are better, but there are always going to be situations in which an isolation movement provides an advantage for you, for your individual needs, not necessarily for everyone. All right, next question. I struggle to hit depth on a normal barbell squat, but have no issues with the front squat. Is this a sign of some sort of muscle imbalance? No, it's not a sign of a muscle imbalance. What it is a sign that you might be doing a wider stance low bar squat, because that might be what you're calling a normal squat. Most people can't squat as deep on a low bar as they can a high bar squat or on a front squat. So if you're doing a low bar, that's what's going on. If you're having trouble hitting the same depth or hitting full depth and you're doing a high bar Olympic style squat with a shoulder width stance, then you have some sort of mental hang up, because normally it would be that you would be leaning forward too far. But if you've been doing front squats and hitting depth, you probably have corrected most of your forward lean issues by doing the front squats, because they strengthen up those thoracic erectors and everything that contribute to these problems and force you to learn to use your core better. So you just probably have some sort of mental hang up with the weight that you're using on the high bar squat. And it's something you're going to have to learn to get over, maybe doing some squatting to a box really deep with your normal, just to get past the mental hang up that you have happening. And again, that mental hang up is usually like a fear of falling backwards if you go too deep with that weight on top of your back, because you're uncomfortable with the weight that's there. And so that's what some people need to do. Another way to get around that too, if it's the weight itself that's giving you the mental hang up, it's like when you're going really heavy. What you can also do is practice some walkouts with 50 or 60 or even up to 100 pounds more than you squat, just to get more comfortable with that heavier weight on top of your back. And that's also an option to help with that mental hang up, in addition to the squatting to a box. Those two in combination are a really good tool to get you past that mental hang up. But if you're low bar squatting instead of high bar squatting, that's what it is that you just can't squat as deep with the low bar, and you might need to start adjusting your footing position until you find the low bar position that will let you squat to your maximum depth for you personally. All right, next question. You've stated in the past that veganism is simply an ethical choice and not a health one. Why is it then that there has been Harvard studies illustrating otherwise, and of course the WHO stating red meat, unprocessed, to be a probable carcinogen? Actually, I believe the WHO stated that processed red meat was the problem. But again, the probable carcinogen thing and the whole vegan thing, all right, you've got to look at it this way. Show me one study that shows that vegans outlive any culture or society that eats meat, at least in moderation. Think about it. If you look at all of the longest lived cultures in the world, the longest lived regional diets in the world, every one of them include meat. They don't include large amounts of meat. They're not gorging themselves on meat like on ketogenic diets, but they all eat meat. They're usually leaner meat sources. And you know what? In fact, all of them eat some red meat, yet they're the longest living cultures, things like an Okinawan diet, the Mediterranean diets, things like that all incorporate meat. Vegans cannot compete with that. So this whole idea of vegans seem to always think that their diets are superior, but where's the statistics showing they are? You can't look at something like red meat and say, oh, it's a carcinogen, so anyone who eats any amount of red meat, not just red meat in moderation, is going to die sooner than a vegan. They're going to get cancer at a higher rate than vegans. Well, vegans don't get cancer at a lower rate than the general population. So you're clearly missing something here. You can't step back and ignore the statistics. Where are all these long-lived vegans? Where are the vegans who have better health markers than these other groups? Where are the vegans who are living as long as these other groups that we study? Where are they? If veganism is so superior and healthy, where are they? I understand the ethical argument, but again, veganism takes things to the extreme. They step back and say, because red meat could be a potential carcinogen, that you shouldn't eat any of it, that eating it in moderation isn't better. Yet the people who eat these foods in moderation tend to be healthier and live longer than vegans if they're eating an overall balanced diet. And the same thing, vegans step back and hear something like, aha, if we eat more plants, if we eat a lot of plants in our diet with all the phytonutrients and fiber, it's better for health. So then they assume that your diet needs to include only these things and start excluding all these other products. And they end up with a diet that isn't as balanced, and they don't live as long as these other groups. And so my counter argument to vegans is, where is the data? Where's the proof that vegans are living as long as these other groups are? These longest living cultures with the healthiest diets. Where's your data? You're not. Vegans, at the end of the day, as a demographic, don't appear to be particularly healthy. They're not having amazing health. They're not having super health from their diet. They're not doing better than these other traditional diets that include meat in moderation, and even include red meat in moderation sometimes. You are simply not living as long as they are. And until you are, you don't have any grounds to claim a health superiority to your diet. It's cherry picking data and not understanding that there's a difference between moderation of certain things that could actually have other benefits to you beyond their potential negatives when you consume too much versus just consuming too much. And vegans don't ever seem to grasp that with the data. It just goes over your head. And at the end of the day, veganism is an ethical choice. And you know what? I respect your right to that ethical choice. I'm okay with you having that ethical choice. That's your right. But it's the false claims that it's somehow healthier than these other more balanced approaches that's the problem. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.